Hey everyone, welcome back to Normal But Not, the podcast where we unpack those feelings and experiences that somehow felt normal, but really aren't helping us live our fullest lives. I'm Krystal Centinello, and this is Oliver. I'm your host, certified trauma-informed boundaries and empowerment coach, here to help you peel back the layers of people-pleasing, set guilt-free boundaries, and live authentically. Today's topic hits close to home: guilt. Specifically, that weighty guilt that so many of us carry. The guilt for saying no, for setting boundaries, for putting ourselves first, even for choosing mental and financial health over obligations that feel like shoulds. I'm speaking as someone who has been there. So if this topic resonates with you, if you walk around feeling that guilt on a day-to-day basis, or hearing that little voice in the back of your head that tells you you should do something when you probably don't want to, or just is constantly saying, I should do this, I should do that, even if you don't, then this is the episode for you. Grab your coffee, your cup of tea, or whatever else feels good to you, and sit back and relax and stay tuned. I want to start by sharing a story with you. It was a time when guilt really took a hold of me. It was my grandfather's funeral. Now, this is a story that for you, you may feel like I made the right choice. You may listen to this story and think that, wow, that was bad. Or you may think it was good. These black and white views of good and bad come from our old patterns, our old conditioning. And I want you to keep that in mind as you listen. Some of you may relate to this kind of story, and some of you may just have some judgments. So as you listen, I encourage you to listen without judgment and just hear it. I, of course, went through and judged it on my own, but this is a story where I had a lot of guilt and I still had to say no. So when my grandfather had died, I was teaching in a school. I had my own classroom of third graders. And at the time, my cat wants to tell the story too. At the time, my students had been going through a lot. I was definitely in a place of like pleasing my family, pleasing my students, trying to do what was right for myself, although I didn't really know what was right for me because I was so wrapped up in what was right for everybody else. So I live on the West Coast in Los Angeles, California, and my family, my grandfather, lives on the East Coast in Buffalo, New York. I had taken some time off of work to go and visit my grandfather as he had cancer and he was dying, and I wanted to make sure that I had seen him while he was living. And I brought my daughters with me and we made a trip out of it, and we enjoyed the time with my grandfather, my grandmother, my mom and dad, my entire family. My brother was in town. Like a lot of us were in town during that moment. When he had died just a few weeks after that, it had fallen during a holiday time, like a winter break. And I would have flown back out and gone to the funeral, regardless of the financial strain that it put on my family, because it would have been a short amount of time. The flights were more expensive. It was during the Christmas holiday, so everything is more expensive to fly then. And I was willing to make that effort and spend the money then, even though I had just been there because it was my grandfather. I had spent the time with him. However, flying out there then wasn't for him. It was for my grandmother. It was for my mom. It was for the other people around him who were grieving the process. And it would have been for me as well. However, they didn't plan the funeral then. There was a reason to delay it. And the date of the funeral was actually going to be the day of my daughter's birthday. It was going to be the day I returned to work to teach my students who had gone through a lot of change throughout the year. The flight cost was going to be high. I had just that year gone through a divorce and separation with my ex-husband. So there were a lot of things to think about. It was, do I go back and be there for my grandfather's funeral, although even though I had just been there, or do I stay in Los Angeles and be here for my daughter's birthday and the start of the school year? And also, after just having divorced and separated and being in a financial situation where I needed to keep my job, and also just getting out of a relationship where I really was gaslit and I had all of these thoughts of, am I doing the right thing? I was constantly questioning myself and barely knew my own voice. I was afraid that if I did something wrong in my own family as a parent, that I was going to like have my children taken away from me. Now, rationally, that was not going to happen. I was a great mom. I was financially stable. I was doing all of these things, but there were all of these concerns and worries about what if. And I decided that I was going to miss my grandfather's funeral. Now, I can justify it all I want and tell you all of the stories. But at the time, and even as I still tell you the story, I can feel the guilt. I felt the guilt harder then. I still feel it a little bit. Like, did I make the right choice? Now, I can tell you now, today, I made the right choice. The guilt is still there. I mean, if I could have duplicated myself and put myself in both places at once, I absolutely would have done it. But that's not the reality. I had to make the right choice for my family. I had to make the choice for my livelihood. I had to make the choice in the moment that was the better of the two options. It's like when you take a test in school or a standardized test and you have four options on a multiple choice exam. And you're like, well, two of these look really good. And you have to pick the best one. Well, that one was the best one for me. But I'll tell you, it did not come without repercussions. It did not come without additional external guilt. I did have family members who were like, I can't believe you're doing this. I can't believe this is the choice that you're making. You're missing your grandfather's funeral. What is your mother going to think? What is your grandmother going to think? And if the person on the other end didn't for a second think that I already felt bad or I already had guilt, then they didn't know me that well. Or they were only concerned about themselves. And at the time, I really had to tell myself that over and over and over again. And at the time, I did have to seek external validation from other people for them to tell me, Krystal, you're making the best choice you can. At the time, I went to my mother. I told my mom, this is what I'm going through. And she validated me. Now, I'm at a point now, cut to 10 years later, where I can make these decisions on my own without or with way less external validation. But then I needed as much external validation as possible. I didn't know my own voice. I was feeling the guilt really hard. And I had external people guilting me. So I needed that external validation as well. I mean, I constantly questioned myself. What does this mean about me? What are other people going to think? I mean, how many of you today go through situations where when the guilt creeps in, you're questioning, what is someone going to think of me? You're afraid of letting other people down. It's not about what's best for you. It's about what's best for everybody else. And it keeps you stuck in that cycle of self-doubt. Enough about me. Let's talk about guilt being something that we're all familiar with, especially those of us who grew up feeling like love or approval was something that you had to earn. And some of you may be sitting here going, my childhood was great. My parents were together. Nobody was abusive, and my parents loved me and they told me how great I was. And that's the part that's normal, right? That's the part that feels normal. But if you grew up in a way where you're feeling guilty today, it's not. Your parents or your family members may not have explicitly made you feel like you had to earn their love, but something in your past triggered you. Something happened where you received some type of external validation or external reward that made you realize that when you did something for somebody else, it felt good. You got some type of congratulations or praise, and you started to realize that you needed to please, you needed to do things perfectly, or you needed to care for everybody else. And now, as an adult, those old patterns creep in. And when you say no, you start to feel the guilt because you're not behaving in the way that you once did. You're not behaving in the way that gave you those rewards or the praise. And what we're doing today is we are going to challenge that idea that guilt is normal or even helpful. Are you ready for some actionable steps? Let's start with reflecting on what triggers your guilt. Now, this is that time. Pick up your pencil, your paper, your pen, your markers, your computer, whatever it is, take notes. So let's start by recognizing when guilt tends to pop up. Think of a recent situation when you felt that pang of guilt. Go ahead. Think of it. Was it because you couldn't meet someone else's expectation or perceived expectation? Did you feel like you were letting someone down? A family member, a friend? Now, if you can't think of it right now on the spot, I want you to pause this or set a reminder somewhere in your phone or somewhere else to spend some time journaling about these moments. Try to identify any feelings that might be rooted in childhood, or maybe it's just society's messages that are influencing how you see yourself. Now, if you consider yourself a millennial, like myself, you likely grew up in the age of obedience. That is, by no fault of anyone's, we were conditioned as children to be obedient. That was the good way to raise your child. So that would be the societal piece if you're struggling to figure that out. So let's reframe your mindset a little bit. Instead of that guilty feeling, when that sneaks in, like it did for me with my grandfather's funeral, I want you to pause and ask, what would I say to a friend in this situation? Now, as a people pleaser, you are really great at being there for others. Can you be there for yourself too? Now, if you immediately said no, the answer is yes. You can be there for other people. You can be there for you. Pretend that you are the person that needs someone there for them. By the way, you are that person who needs someone there for them. And if you're not great about asking for help, then you have to be there for you. So if you were going to be there for a friend, chances are you'd be compassionate. If you were the person feeling that guilty feeling like the grandfather situation, you might remind them that sometimes you have to make a hard choice for the sake of survival. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person. Guilt in these moments are not always terrible. They can actually be a sign that you're doing something necessary for your well-being, not something wrong. That leads me to self-compassion. So we hear it a lot, but what does it actually mean in practice? What does it actually look like? It's pretending that you are treating yourself like you would treat a friend or a child. For me, sometimes it's a mantra, and it might look like I am worthy of love and care, even if I have to make tough decisions. When you feel that guilt creeping in, repeat it to yourself. I am worthy of love and care, even when I have to make tough decisions. Make it a daily affirmation if you need to. The goal is to affirm that you are worthy, even when guilt tries to convince you otherwise. Celebrate some small wins. I want you to start celebrating your guilt-free wins. Now, most of us are probably focused so much on the times that we feel guilty that we don't realize the times that we don't. Keep a journal of the moments where you set a boundary for yourself and you didn't let guilt take over. You might need to start small. Start in those safe places, maybe with safe people or moments that you really don't care about the outcome. Reflect on how you felt after you set that boundary without the guilt and congratulate yourself for taking that step, no matter how small it may seem. These moments are the stepping stones to reclaiming your power and living guilt-free. Lastly, set some boundaries on guilt. Let me say that again. You're going to set boundaries on guilt. Identify one area where you frequently feel guilty. Maybe it's saying no to social gatherings, like I did. Create a boundary. I will no longer feel guilty for prioritizing my needs in this area. I will no longer feel guilty for prioritizing needs in this area. That boundary is for you. You don't need to communicate it to anyone else. You are communicating it to yourself. Reinforce this commitment to yourself, whatever way works for you. Maybe you're writing it down. Maybe you are typing it in your phone. Maybe you have it pasted on a mirror, or maybe you are just saying it every day. It is about training your mind to recognize when guilt is holding you back and refusing to let it run your life. Now, those are my actionable steps for this episode. Remember, guilt does not have to dictate your life. It is not your job to sacrifice your well-being for the sake of keeping everyone else comfortable. Embracing self-compassion, celebrating small wins, and setting boundaries on guilt itself can transform your relationships, your confidence, and ultimately the quality of your life. Thanks for tuning in to Normal But Not. If you're ready to dig deeper, check out my Breaking Free from Guilt PDF. It is available on krystalcentinello.com/resources. This will help you take these steps even further. And don't forget to connect with me on Instagram at Complete Coaching with Krystal, where I share tips, inspiration, and real life talk about living authentically and unapologetically. See you next time.